And given that this technology in particular is going to reshape the world like nothing we've ever seen before, if we decide that we're just not going to use it, well, the devil's going to. And I guarantee he'll use it to wreck us. I just consider this a critical battleground. And I don't think we can cede the field, especially with this technology, to the enemy. If we are passive and we're not focused on evangelization as a church, if we're not willing to take risks and proclaim the gospel, there are souls that are going to be lost on this earth because of that. And we have to take responsibility for that. That's on us. And I think we'll be held to account on that in the time we're standing before our Lord in judgment.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Catholic Founders Podcast, where our goal is to create an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who will use their businesses to carry out God's will in the world and to reinsert God into the culture. Before we start, please do note that if you are in or near New York City, we are hosting a dinner for Catholic founders on the 16th of December. We are still pulling together the details, and it's all very last minute as that's kind of how I do everything, just in case you're not familiar. But the date is set for the 16th of December. If you'd like to attend, please reach out. If you would like to help sponsor this or maybe help organize this in any way, you can also reach out to me directly. We are looking for a good spot to host it because I think we'll be able to get around 20 people to come together if we have a good spot for it. If we're just going to go to a restaurant, it'll have to be smaller. But reach out if you'd like to attend or help organize. All right, today I am speaking with Matthew Harvey Sanders, who is an absolute legend. If you're not familiar with Matthew, he has a really fascinating background. So he grew up in Canada after studying political science, he ended up discerning the priesthood and eventually served in the Canadian military. And then fast forward a little bit, he worked for the Archdiocese of Toronto. And along the way, he ended up pivoting into the tech world through a lot of digital evangelization. And he's now heavily involved in the venture tech space. He's the founder of Longbeard, which he describes as a studio building a lot of different Catholic technology products, most notably Magisterium AI. If you're not familiar, I'm a big fan of this. It's basically an AI large language model that's trained on church documents, the Bible, the catechism, all of the church kind of teachings. And it's extremely helpful as I produce this show. So we had a lot of things to talk about. Matthew is very much a leader in this space. He's probably one of the most, if not the number one person to talk about AI from a Catholic perspective. So I really enjoyed the opportunity to meet with him. And there's a lot of things we could have talked about because of his background, but we focused on a couple key areas. The first one is why Catholics must engage with AI and should not be afraid of leading during this technological revolution. Secondly, we talked about the civilizational risks of AI, particularly when it comes to becoming a proxy for real human relationships or spiritual life. We talked about the work of Builders AI Forum in Rome, which is focused on ensuring AI is properly adopted and used in the church and to its advantage and its mission. He has built this forum that meets every year. And might actually start meeting a couple more times per year or having satellite meetings. But they actually had a letter directly from the Pope this year asking them to focus on the discussion on a couple key topics. So it's really, really fascinating that he's got that relationship with the Vatican. Then we talked about the importance of understanding and ordering new technology toward the ultimate goal of human flourishing. We talked about the call for Catholics to embrace a wild ambition for God in all of their building endeavors. This is something I personally really, really enjoyed. And I think the most intriguing part of Matthew's insights that he shared is that fear of technology is often a fear of ourselves and others, and that the only way to combat the misuse of AI for morally minded Catholics is to actively build and steer the technology, effectively going into the fray and doing what we're supposed to do, like going into the battle and using the things that God has equipped us with to lead and bring people closer to God. So before the show starts, shout out to our sponsors, Verso Jobs. If you need to hire mission-aligned talent, reach out to them. And Paraclete VA. If you're looking to hire offshore talent, but you'd like to make sure that they are Catholic, you can also reach out to Paraclete VA. And if you resonate with the content that we put out each week, consider becoming a paid supporter of this Substack. By doing so, you will get access to the Catholic Founders Guild and all the perks that come with it. All you have to do is go to CatholicFounders.com/subscribe and upgrade to a paid subscription there. All right, enjoy the show. All right, welcome to the podcast, Matthew. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I cannot complain. It is a very early morning for me. I'm in San Francisco visiting some friends, but and that's why my background is not set up in my usual podcast studio. But we're living with it. So I appreciate you making the time. We've been trying to arrange this for a bit. So you have a very interesting background. We could spend a lot of time talking about it, but I'm going to do my best to introduce you here, and then you kind of correct anything that I get wrong. So you grew up in Canada. You studied political science. Ended up at some point discerning the priesthood, and then eventually served in the Canadian military. You worked for the Archdiocese of Toronto for a little bit of, it was a decent amount of time, if I recall correctly. And then along the way, you somehow got involved in the tech world. I'm actually curious how that happened. I didn't quite see the connection there. I was curious if you had studied computer science or something, but I didn't see that. So I was like, okay, I don't know how this happened. And then now you're involved in the venture tech space very heavily. You're building Longbeard, which is the way I would describe it, and you can correct this, would be kind of like a almost like a venture studio that's building lots of different Catholic technology projects or companies. And then specifically, most notably, Magisterium AI, which I'm personally a big fan of. I am curious, just really briefly, how did you end up getting into technology in the first place? Like, what drew you to it, or what was the impetus there?
Well, I mean, I've been working with youth when I was younger, so I guess I kind of always had a heart for reaching young people as myself for much of my life. Anyways, I was kind of lost, and I remember what it was like before really finding God and the church. But anyway, I mean, life kind of pulled me different directions. Obviously, when I was a seminarian, I'm thinking about reaching out to youth that was a big focus of the Paulist Fathers, which was the order I was discerning
Mhm.
with at the time. And of course, part of their charism was using kind of the modern tools or technologies of the era to preach preach the gospel. I mean, they were one of their famous episodes is they used to ride around in these big caravans with speakers back in the old days, and they'd drive them into the Bible Belt, and they'd looking to convert the evangelicals and things. And they also, they pioneered Paul's Press, and they're one of the first to create a radio channel and TV channel and things like that. So obviously, I became aware of the importance of modern communications in evangelization, and then I went to work for Cardinal Collins and initially just helped fix up the Office of Spiritual Affairs. But eventually I took over the Special Projects Office. And one of the
Mhm.
jobs they gave me was to help bring Steubenville conferences to Toronto. And that, of course, necessitated learning how to effectively reach young people and pitch them on this. And that's when I became aware of the enormous challenge of first of all, getting on their radar, then two, packaging content in such a way that it would be of interest to them. So I realized that, the church didn't do a great job at that. And anyways, I've ultimately, I think by the grace of God, we were successful. And I found the whole experience quite moving. So then we decided, we probably should start a company which is kind of focused specifically on helping the church to leverage technology. So this is a very long answer, but effectively that work led us to Rome and getting involved in technological infrastructure consulting and building platforms for church organizations, working with Google on some cool infrastructure projects. And as we continued to work more with these kind of deep tech players, we became more aware of the power of the technology and eventually solving a bunch of problems for other people. We ended up kind of being like an education on the job, a pretty comprehensive one. And so when AI dropped, we were aware of the promise of the technology, but we didn't see a practical application for it for the church that would work at that time. And then when we saw ChatGPT was out there, Catholics were using it, and we realized, as cool as it is, it has some downsides. That's really what started the whole project of seeing if we could mitigate it and use it to basically ensure that the Catholic Church was leading on this important technology.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing that's fascinating to me is that there's a lot of people who say, oh, we're going to build Catholic conversion or we're going to build some kind of Catholic thing, Catholic AI. Usually it's crappy. Like you guys have built something that's actually very, very high quality. And I just find it, I don't know if you have any commentary on that, but for somebody who didn't necessarily start their life out in technology specifically with like sort of a passion just for it, it's really fascinating to me how you guys have done such a good job. And I'm assuming maybe you just give me the answer what you think, but I'm assuming it has to do with your just desire to do good in the world. Like you need this to be good so that people actually want to use it. Otherwise, what's the point of building it at all? Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in principle. I mean, we were a design agency building technology
Mm,
for 10 years, right? So part of that is studying what works. And a large part of that is just looking at platforms which have, spend millions, sometimes billions on marketing and design.
mhm.
So we tried as much as possible to become disciples of how they build and then try and apply it into the Catholic market. So in large part, for us, we had ChatGPT is kind of an example, right? And so effectively, as they're working through design problems and they're releasing research papers on how they tackle this and that, we're able to kind of apply a lot of those design principles and kind of technological strategies to building Catholic AI.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then one other thing before we get into specifically we're going to talk mostly about AI today, in case people didn't didn't pick up on that. But before we get there, you did discern the priesthood, and you had that openness to go and pursue that. I'm very curious if you have any commentary on this, or just in general, especially young men to consider the priesthood, because I don't think a lot of people ever want to even open their minds to that these days. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or things that you'd mention there.
Well, I mean, we need more priests, right? I think it's all plainly obvious to us that we have to, right? We need more men discerning the priesthood. So really, when I converted to Catholicism, it was just one of those questions I put to myself. The church needs priests. Is that
Hmm.
is that how I'm supposed to serve? And so I thought, in the very least, I wasn't sure, but I certainly valued what they did, and so I entered seminary to find out. And so I would say to any kind of man or woman, if she's discerning religious life, if you're attracted by what the role of the priest is, and you feel that they're vital, and you feel that you may don't have the gifts to do it, just go and try it. I guarantee you, going into seminary and coming out again, you'll be a better person for it.
Yeah, I think it's also important because it's like you can't really go the other way, right? Like if we're supposed to first understand our vocation to God before our vocation in the world, we must go down that route and pursue it. I personally discerned religious life at one point as well, but I'm so glad I did because otherwise I'd be constantly wondering like what if that was what I was called to. So I just appreciate that perspective. So let's talk about I guess AI broadly. So we have discussed AI quite a lot on the podcast, and many of those people who come on, I think you're the most qualified of those people so far to really give us some interesting insights. So let's start here. There are some people saying that we should not really engage with AI at all, and I obviously believe that that's not your belief. So why is that an incorrect from your perspective?
Well, I think I'd first off start by asking why would you say that? I mean, the church has a pretty long tradition of leveraging technologies of her day to proclaim the gospel, right? So I mean, go back like I think I listed a few already, right? We have the internet. We were late to that one, but the internet, TV, radio, publishing. So I think, I mean, frankly, if we feel that we have a message which is worth sharing, and we feel that we're convicted that we have an obligation to do so, we should use every tool and means at our disposal. So that's how I effectively see it. And given that this technology in particular is going to reshape the world like nothing we've ever seen before, if we decide that we're just not gonna use it, well, the devil's going to. And I guarantee he'll use it to wreck us. So I just consider this a critical battleground, and I don't think we can cede the field, especially with this technology, to the enemy.
Can you say a little bit more about that, like going into the fray? Because I think a lot of people, I don't know where this developed or where this started to come, but a lot of the Catholics I grew up around wanted to just stay away from technology broadly. I think maybe they saw the internet and it being evil, and then it made it worse, and they kind of went away from it. But I always pose to people, imagine if Steve Jobs or Elon Musk were devout Catholics, like the technology would be substantially better used or better designed. So can you just talk a little bit more about this role that we have to be leaders in the technological revolutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this just comes down to the importance of formation, right? I mean, the technology itself, I mean, you can make a case that AI is not neutral because it's trained on human data, but I could go on and on about that. But in large part, it's a tool, right? And a tool can be used to do good or to do harm. I think that's fairly evident to most of us. Really, it just comes down to the discipline of the person who's wielding the tool. And I think if we as Catholics, this is why the mission of the church evangelization mission is so important. If we're formed responsibly, good, solid human, intellectual, and spiritual formation, then we should consider this very powerful tool something very useful, right? That we can use to advance the mission. I think fear of technology is not actually the technology of itself. I think for the most part, it's fear of us and fear of other. And I think we just have to be honest about that. And I think really the answer to that is just to double down on evangelization and recognize that fear that we have is legitimate. I think we should be afraid of other people using this tool to harm others. But that just means all the more that we should work hard to ensure that most people are using it to do good and not harm, and not letting those who have bad intentions to prey upon others with the technology.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think from my one thing I often think about is the fear is not rooted properly because you shouldn't go through life fearful of your outcome in some way. Work out your salvation in fear and trembling, but you go forth with courage because you know God is with you, right? And if you are truly Christian, if you're truly Catholic, you understand the faith, you would be like the apostles and you would be going out being very zealous to recognize like these evils need to be guided with a moral perspective. And in so many cases today, I'm recording this as as I'm in San Francisco, like just surrounded by people who are godless, and they think that they're going to be able to create God through AI. So it's like we need morally minded people. So we actually have a unique responsibility to go into those fields and to effectively steer them based off of the church's wisdom. Right? I like that a lot. What do you think are the things that we should be cautious about? Really, like broad strokes with AI. What are the things we should avoid using AI for?
Well, and I think probably the biggest civilizational risk is people use it as a proxy, right, for let's say real human relationships or spiritual life, thinking that somehow the AI is going to be able to fill those vital roles, and you can see why they'd want to lean into that. Human relationships are difficult, right? They take time, they take discipline, and they're messy. And an AI, given the way it's trained, is meant to be as accommodating, obliging, patient, right, as one can possibly imagine. And so, in some ways, you could understand why someone would opt for the AI or the robot over the human. But it's really important that the church and we, as disciples of the church, remind people ultimately of their telos, right? That ultimately, what's going to make you happy is basically becoming friends with God, with loving and worshiping God, and making deep and meaningful connections with other human beings. Nothing else will suffice. If we can effectively sell that, then people have a reason to undertake the harder journey, right? But the ultimately more rewarding one. Otherwise, if we don't sell it, then people and they don't have hope, and or they never even heard the message of the gospel. When sexually they have no work because of AI and robots, and they're sitting there with the big existential questions. You can't blame them for feeling ill-equipped to wrestle through those, that they just opt for distractions, which we know ultimately won't end well.
Are you looking to hire people who actually care about your mission? You should get in touch with Verso Jobs. Verso Jobs is a platform that uses a gamified application process to find candidates who actually have the right skills and mission alignment with your team. Joe and the team at Verso Jobs first understand your needs, then they go out and they headhunt the best candidates and present you with highly aligned profiles in very short order, oftentimes turning around profiles within a few days or a week. They also won't break the bank, so whether you're hiring for your startup, school, parish, or nonprofit, Verso makes it easy to find mission-aligned talent ready to build the kingdom. Visit versojobs.com to get started. That's Verso, VERSO jobs.com. To the heights. Yeah, the distractions piece is interesting. There's somebody who came on the pod, Lucas Wall. He brought up this idea that I'd like to get your take on. Is that because of AI and because of the way he framed it was humans have had kind of a monopoly on wisdom or ideas for a while, right? And now it's like we don't have that. So people are asking themselves, well, what is my true worth? Because if I'm not able to, be the source of knowledge or of wisdom in a particular domain, what is my value? And he was framing it that is leading people to ask the right questions, which, in his opinion, will lead more to an understanding of the dignity of a human person just intrinsically. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah. Listen, in the end of the day, I think for a lot of contemporary civilization, utility is kind of what it's all about. When I think
Mhm.
about I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, but why build Neuralink? Now, in the short term, it seems like it's to restore people that have debilitating issues, brain damage, and things like that, and restore them to their full humanity. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But ultimately, we know that's not the end game for that technology. They want to basically expand human beings' computational capabilities. Why? Why do that? I mean, why is it so important to grow in wisdom? Right? I mean, ultimately, these are not ends in themselves. And so it's really important for us as Catholics to understand what life is all about, what civilization is all about. If you miss that, you end up misordering your life and start fixating, and that ultimately I don't think is helpful. And I generally think um, the whole point here, the whole point is to ensure that individuals and civilization flourish. And it's important to understand what that means. Like, what does it mean for a human being to flourish? What does that consist of? What does it mean for a civilization to flourish? Tell me exactly. How does that work? What does it look like? If we can get clear on that, then we can make sure that the technologies we're developing are pointed at the right problems, or what we call the impediments to human flourishing. And that way, the technologies there is serving human flourishing as opposed to getting in the way or distracting from it.
What does human flourishing look like, though? If we have to define it, what does it look like?
Well, Jesus would be a pretty good personification of it, right? So effectively, what you're trying to nail down is how did Jesus live his life, and what can we learn from that? But I mean, we've kind of studied this at the Humane to Bono Foundation. Effectively, what you're trying to look at is what are all the constituent elements that need to be in place in order for a human being to realize their full potential, right? To realize their purpose. That's a very non-technical definition of human flourishing. But that's what it's really all about, right? We want people to realize their sacred vocation. We want them to realize their gifts, be able to hone those gifts, and then put them at the service of God. Well, to honor God and serve others, right? And then to do that in community and right relationships. So figuring out what the good life is supposed to consist of, and then making sure that our life is properly ordered to succeeding at that, and then recognizing how that has to be in concert with other human beings, and then collectively we have to be trying to build a civilization which is conducive to human flourishing. That to me that's the great project. Interestingly, I think that, well, I should say unfortunately, I think one of the reasons why this transition into the anaerobotics age will be rough is in large part because it's hard for most individuals to explain what life's about, what human flourishing is for myself, for
Mhm.
civilization. This is a problem. Because as I say this often, but as my old boss, Cardinal Collins, used to say, if you know where you're going, you'll be more likely to get there. And I would say, in principle, that's our problem, right? If we don't know what we're building these technologies for, then I think what will end up happening is the devil will come in there and he'll find all kinds of ways for us to build technologies which distract, which are useless. And I think that's one of my primary concerns.
Do you think that AI can help, broadly speaking, people in culture to understand the purpose of life, the importance of, like, do you think it'll lead more people to understand about eternity and heaven and learn about that goal? Or do you think it's going to just make it even harder to figure that out?
I think it depends. I mean, AIs are trained with very specific objective functions, right? As we say in the industry. So it depends how the AI is trained. So the AI is trained to help people understand the truth of the gospel and what the Catholic way of life is all about. Then effectively, it should be doing that. If it's not, if it's optimized to keep you engaged or keep you chatting with the AI endlessly, that's obviously not a good thing. And you can imagine there's all kinds of things you could train AI to do, like go buy this product or that product, and so on and so on. So I think a large part of that comes down to what is how the actual technology is being built, what is effectively its telos and the effective role for it. But yeah, I totally think AI can be instrumental in this. I mean, we see that all the time with Matters from AI. We have countless stories of people that went to Matters from AI with questions and end up in the OCIA process becoming Catholic. We just hired an engineer who went through those exactly those steps. He had questions, entered OCIA. He said, "I can't believe this just happened to me. This is incredible," and said he wanted to come and work for us so that more people would come. To come to know Christ. And when you think about it, like I think a lot of times we get hyperfixated on the AI itself and not enough about effectively what the AI is trying to do and what knowledge and data it's accessing in order to help provide answers. And I try to explain that, think of Matters from AI, we call it Matters from AI, but in principle, think of Matters from AI more like very helpful librarian. When you're asking questions of Matters from AI, you're not really interacting with the AI. What you're interacting with is the collective works of all the doctors and fathers and popes, the magisterium of the church. When you ask our AI a question, it's going another technology, but it's going and retrieving all relevant passages to answering your question, then giving it to an AI read over and then basically answer based on those documents. So it's important to remember that you're engaging human, right, which has of course been provided via God, but you're engaging other human beings and their ideas and their insights. You're not effectively engaging the AI. Now, it's not the case for other AI systems, but it is for ours.
So can you explain the difference though? How is it different from, is it just because of how you build it?
Yeah, it's in large part it's right now it's a question of how you scaffold it and what kind of system message you're giving it. Like what is its objective with function, as we say. So if you go to a typical LLM and you ask it a question, right? It's basically going to go. It's gonna process that request. It's gonna think about it a little bit, and then it's gonna plan an answer, and then it's gonna answer and do this autoaggressive next token prediction. I'll try to avoid getting too technical here, but it's doing that based upon the memory. It's like it's compressed inside of its parameters, so it's doing that from memory. Now, sometimes if you ask it, it may go and query the internet and retrieve sources as well. But it's important to note that that insight is primarily coming from what it's trained on, and that could be the Catechism of the Catholic Church, or it could be a Reddit forum, right? So this is one of the problems, and one of the issues is that the AI doesn't even know when it's answering a question exactly where that information is being retrieved from, unless it goes and sources it directly from the internet. And if it's sourcing directly from the internet, did it get the information from a blog post, or did it get it from the Vatican's website? These are big questions. So that's when you're doing with secular AI, that's effectively what you're dealing with. And now it's also important to remember that the AI was not trained to be faithful to the Catholic Church, right? It's trained to align, particularly like with users. And so if once it intuits what a user's value system is, it will try and align itself in answering along those lines, right? And then that's fine if you have a fairly relativistic moral view and what all you really care about. I mean, if you're ultimately the one deciding what's true and what's not true, then that makes perfect sense. But for Catholics, it doesn't, right? So our AI, how it's different. I mean, effectively, when you ask our AI a question, it's not trying to answer from its own parameter. Effectively, what it does is it understands the question, and then it conducts a bunch of searches across a very large knowledge base to extract insights from the fathers, the doctors, and popes that it thinks is relevant to answering your query. And then basically, it reads those all over, and then it tries to distill them into a kind of a concrete answer with inline citations, so that you know that everything it says is grounded in a primary source. So that's kind of the major distinction. AI is objective, is to ensure that it's faithful, no matter what. So that's effectively if it knows it's winning, if it's faithful. If it's not faithful, it's losing. So effectively, all the scaffolding and all the technology we built around it is to ensure that.
So this is interesting. I mean, when the internet came around, I think a lot of people we're like, oh, this would be great because now effectively truth will win because like a lot of people would say, oh, democracy will take reign in other countries that don't have it because everybody will see how it's going on. And I've met just in the past couple of years a lot of people who have come to the faith because or they've converted from being Protestant to Catholic because they realized that a lot of the arguments were incorrect and it came from the internet. It was like internet apologists and people doing this and sharing the truth. But what you're saying that with AI, it's not necessarily even if it's a secular AI, it's not going to share the truth because it's not math. It's not something where it will say this doesn't make sense, therefore it will help you find the truth. It will just spit out whatever's been fed into it, correct? It doesn't have the ability to recognize that if they come up with an answer of 1 + 1 = 3, that is incorrect. Do I understand this correctly?
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, the models are getting smarter and smarter, right? And some people like Elon, he's training XAI. He's trying to basically he's training objectives are truth and curiosity. Curiosity is about alignment and sure the AI doesn't kill us. But the truth is just because obviously the AI will be better and more useful the more it's grounded in reality. So, right now there's obviously there's been some limitations in the past where the AIs will hallucinate, and there was a lot of really garbage training data they were trained on. But over time, as we start to isolate the tokens, which are most essential for like emergent capabilities like reasoning and multilingual understanding, we're able to throw out a lot of that crap data and replace it with good data. So slowly but surely, the models are getting more intelligent and more grounded. But there's definitely some limits to autoaggressive, like large language models, the current LMs that we're dealing with, or the LRMs, the large reasoning models. But that said, they don't have an effective understanding of the way the world works, like in the same way we do. So they don't truly understand reality. What they know is what they've been trained on, and that's a very significant abstraction of truth. It's important to note, like
Mm,
models today are trained on like 20 to 30 trillion tokens, which is let's say it's 15 trillion words, right? And that gets compressed into, let's say, a 3 trillion parameter model, right? That's a heck of a lot of compression that's happening. The recollection, the LLM's recollection of what it's been trained on is very foggy. So when you ask it a
mm,
question, it thinks it knows the answer in the sense that it kind of remembers seeing it, and it may remember some of the points made in a particular book or something like that, but it can't recall it perfectly, and therefore, it's kind of a vague recollection, so it may get it wrong sometimes. This is where hallucinations kind of come in. Hallucinations are, I could get more technical about how those work, but in principle, yeah, it thinks it knows the answer, but in fact it doesn't. And
mhm.
it's rewarded for answering, even when it may think that it may not know, right? It's rewarded effectively for guessing. Now they're trying to now fix this, but this is something important for people to know in the way these things are built.
So if I understand this correctly, then it's not that it's not even possible to create this AI God that they're trying to create where it does have true reasoning because it cannot in itself actually pursue this idea of truth fully unless it has correct input sources. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, so I tend to be quite I tend to think as AI gets more and more intelligent, it will certainly, I think, be able to explore truths with us and
Mm,
direct us to them. I think that's almost a certainty. I mean, and we're already starting to see that. I mean, with the new models, especially if they're given the ability to, through tools to access the internet and do research. I mean, they're able to deliver pretty tight reports. Like if you use, Gemini's deep research on, it's pretty amazing what it can do. And in many cases, it can be better than even than a human could do. So I think in that sense, as the models get better, as we figure out what's causing the hallucinations, it seems to be clear what's causing that, which means I think effectively we'll probably crack hallucinations in the next couple of years, and that means that models will be more grounded and more deterministic, meaning that we can kind of guide the way that they think and operate. This is not to say that we'll understand necessarily what's going on in their head, because that's a whole field called mechanistic interpretability, which is extremely complex. It'll be ages before we really understand how these things work. But we in principle know how to grow them, right? So we know the principles,
mhm.
and I think we'll get better at scaffolding them to make them more reliable. So I think in the area of theology and philosophy, one of the reasons we created a training program here called Ephraim is I feel strongly over the next year or two that we'll be able to train a model which is an objective function of fidelity that will be able to accurately reflect the truths of the faith, and to some extent help generalize from first principles to people's everyday lives.
So being able to come up with those outcomes without necessarily being quote unquote trained on the church data or the church teachings.
Yeah, no, Ephraim is being the real one of the reasons why we set up the Alexandria Digitization Hub in Rome. These robo scanners in Rome, which are digitizing the Pontifical University libraries here, is because we need to grow the Catholic data set. And one of the
Hmm.
reasons we need to grow the Catholic data set is because we need more training data. So effectively, what we're trying to do is we need it because without more data, we can't effectively train Catholic AI. But
Hmm.
also this additional data just helps the model to grasp these deep theological and philosophical concepts better.
Hmm.
So I do effectively think through a number of different kind of trading approaches and expanding Catholic data that we can effectively build a model which is not only the most aligned model in the world when it comes to our fidelity benchmarks, but is also generally useful.
At this point, you've heard me mention our mission many times. We're building an army of Catholic entrepreneurs who are committed to reinserting God into the culture. Well, if this mission resonates with you, we want you to be part of the Catholic Founders Guild. You can think of this as kind of an association of Catholic business owners who share the same mission and who take this idea of bringing back God into the culture actually very seriously. We're currently around 50 members and growing quickly. And when you become a member, you can find other Catholics to do business with, to buy services from, to invest in and alongside. All this is possible with our member directory. And on top of that, we do have 2 to 3 calls each month with the community. One to discuss a particular topic, like stewardship or competition, some of the recent conversations we've had on that. One to learn from an expert and ask them questions, like our recent one on the tax changes, or our next one coming up with Alan Twomey, who is talking to us about how to grow our sales and our business, but in a virtuous way. And the other is a more open-ended community hangout call. These will happen every single month. There's also no specific time commitment asked of you when you join the Catholic Founders Guild. If you want to be heavily involved, you're welcome to. If you just want to be a member of the Guild but don't really have time to attend the calls, all we ask is that you stay committed to the mission of building for God and be open to meeting other members of the Guild when they reach out. To join, the first step is to upgrade to a paid membership on our Substack. Think of it like Patreon if you're not familiar. Just go to CatholicFounders.com/subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, so literally anybody can afford it. Oh, and I forgot to mention, many of the members have ended up actually finding customers within the community within just a few months of joining. So what I'm saying is you're likely going to get your $100 back, even if not directly through sales, at least in value and advice from the Guild. We will see you on the inside. Got it. Okay. This is helpful. I want to shift a little bit to just broadly speaking, how you're interacting with the church. So you're based in Rome and you have this thing called the Builders AI Forum. I think it just happened a couple weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what that is and what you guys are doing there?
So, I mean, we started the Builders AI Forum. I think the first one was October 2024. We did it in large part because we recognize as a company that this AI thing is going to impact the church in huge, profound ways, not just in its evangelical mission, but I think just people's lives. And of course, so therefore, pastorally, the church has to understand what's going to happen, and so that we're ready to respond as these civilizational changes unfold. Kind of like with industrial revolution. But we were worried because we didn't really see a very robust conversation happening within the church. So initially, the October forum, the first one we did was just to bring in a bunch of speakers to speak to the different kind of important areas, around AI, so people understand what the technology is, how it's impacting us now, how it's likely to impact us in the future. And then we threw in a couple interesting things like understanding consciousness and why that's important to have a Catholic understanding of that. And this will help us explore the question of can AIs be conscious and think and these kind of things. So anyways, that was kind of experiment, but we got a great signal from that. And that one was in the Vatican. And so we decided to do another one, which, as you say, was about 2 weeks ago. This one was different though. What we brought instead of sitting through a day of kind of presentations and lectures, what we really want to do is bring together people who are kind of experts in particular areas. And this could be people from the industry. This could be academics, philosophers, theologians, people that are actively working in ministry. Bring them all together and focus on specific areas. So I think there were 6 in total. There was AI in media, there was AI in healthcare, there's AI in education, there was Catholic AI and robotics, and there was one specifically on kind of building a Catholic Turing test focused on kind of consciousness. And the idea was to bring together these people to work intensely over 2 days to figure out what is the state of play, and then what can we effectively do to ensure that AI is being properly adopted and used in order to help the church find competitive advantage, for lack of a better word. Got it. Okay. So then how do you then actually develop a partnership sort of with the church leadership to then get this information synthesized to them? Because if you're there in Rome, I'm assuming you're close to the library, obviously, but how are you
doing this. And have you seen any particular engagement from Leo the 14th to do this? I don't know how any of this works, so you have to fill me in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the church, I mean, certainly, Jip is wrestling with this. I think that at this point, I think everyone understands that this technology is going to change the world, and now they're just trying to figure out pastorally how do we use it, and how can we best serve people and shepherd, I should really say, people through this transition. So this is already happening in the bishops' conferences. I've spoken to the USCCB on this. I know they're actively looking at it. I just got back from speaking to former outgoing president of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. I know they're working on it. Father Philip Larray is one of the kind of leading thought leaders in this. Just addressed the CCB assembly, Canadian Council of Catholic Bishops, and then of course here in Rome, there's several different AI initiatives which are studying different areas of the challenges. And Pope Leo is I think we've all seen he's very engaged here on this subject. He's thinking a lot about it, and we're all expecting a pretty important document to come from him soon. He wrote a letter to participants in Builders AI Forum, kind of giving us marching orders is what he was hoping would come out of this, and was trying to give us some arcs as we have our conversations. So I think the church hierarchy is very engaged, but I really feel like because given the nature of this tech, that this is a technology, this is a real opportunity for the laity to stand up. And I think that it's important for us to stand up and recognize, in the end of the day, we're the ones building this. We're the ones deploying this. We're the ones really thinking through how we want to actively regulate it. And the church has the formal church has a very important role to play in advising us in those areas. But we have to take ownership responsibility on this one, which is why it's so important we understand the technology, how it works, how it's impacting things today, how it'll impact things in 10 years, and make sure that we're, as much as we possibly can, and holding people who are building this technology accountable and telling them where we want this technology pointed. And that way we have effective agency.
What is Pope Leo's directive to you, Ben? Like, it's a really quick summary. Like, what outcome did he want?
Yeah, I think, I mean, in principle, I don't think it'll shock anyone listening, just to make sure that we keep human dignity really at the center of this, right? Recognize it's a tool. And so we have to wield it responsibly. And just remember, as we're continuing to focus on ways of building it, that we have to think about the consequences of
Yeah.
rolling it out, and kind of, so that was primarily it. But I think the thing that I loved hearing the most was he acknowledged that AI could be an important tool, and it could be used, in many ways to advance the mission, which I think is good. For those who think we should just ignore it, or it's just demonic, and that's not the signal we're getting from him.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's constant. I'm constantly running into this where people are very divided on the issue. It's like it could be good, and I definitely of the camp of the optimistic side of things, because I personally think, just from an entrepreneurship side, there's so many families who they work in corporate jobs that don't treat them with human dignity. And with AI, the opportunities to start a side hustle are so much higher. You can then turn that into a full-time income for your family and have sort of freedoms that, just not to say you couldn't do them before, but it just makes it so much easier to do now. And I'm seeing so many people. I just loved seeing more people become entrepreneurs, even with small businesses, because those hard questions that you would have had to have a lawyer for before, you can at least get some ideas on, like, you can get started. So I definitely am of the optimistic side. So I appreciate that. I'm glad to see that Leo is also on that side of things. But you mentioned that it's important for us to lead. How can we get Catholics to really lead on AI? Because you're one person, and I know some people here in SF that are very technically solid. They know what they're good builders, and they're active in this. But a lot of people have just they haven't had a sort of excellence in technology. So how do we get Catholics to lead in AI?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways. I mean, there are people who are Catholic who are working in industry. Some of them are working in very prominent positions. I mean, one of the people that was at our Builders AI Forum runs one of the best kind of AI labs in the world. So we have those people who are well positioned, and I'm not expecting them to go on some kind of crazy crusade here, but I do think that they can use their voice to ensure that the technology is being built with appropriate safety rails in place, so that they're taking into account that these things have to have some kind of meta ethic which guides them, and how do we effectively go about discerning what that ethic should be, and how do we train it into it. So there's a bunch of things within the industry that we Catholics can do. I think, but more than anything else, I think it's just taking the time to truly understand where these technologies are at. I mean, we live in the internet age. It's very easy to get access to information on AI. The difficult part is discerning what is true and what is not, right? I mean, there's a lot of people who don't work close to the technology, but work one step removed from those who do, and tend to infer potentially a lot of bad things based on what they've heard. And I think sometimes we it's kind of like with Hollywood, right? It's been like basically training us for like 20, 30 years to think that AI eventually is just going to ruin the world. And so we have that kind of fear, which is kind of latent within all of us, frankly, because that's the future we've been prepared for decades now. But that's not doesn't have to be the case, right? I mean, we're here now and we're actively building it, and we can make sure that that doesn't happen. I really do believe that. So a large part, we have to recognize that all of us have a role to play in this, every single one of us, because we have to understand what the technology is, and then we have to make sure that our voices are being heard. So if you're concerned about the way that AI technology is being built, or you just want to make sure that technology is being pointed at the right problems, or you want to make sure that it doesn't displace, people's jobs in your community, and the important thing is to do is to stand up and let your voice be heard. We can do that through actively involving ourselves in the whole civic process. We can challenge our political candidates that you want this to be an important election issue. You want them to speak to it. They can go to their priests and bishops and say, they can have a conversation about this. I mean, how should this technology be used in my life? In what areas is it appropriate? What areas is it not? And by understanding that, they can impart that to their children and their friends. So I think there's a lot we can do, but ultimately it comes down to this. We have to take an interest and we have to do the work.
There's this issue where a lot of the people who wield so much of the power, think of Zuckerberg, Mark Andreessen, these people are not necessarily approaching things from the truth for understanding. They're not putting humans at the center. But people like Mark Andreessen, or I mean, there's others we could talk about that are Jason Calcanis. These people were raised Catholic. Do you view there's any like high leverage things that we could be doing to try to go bring the people who already have power and influence them back to the truth? Have you ever contemplated this versus having to build entirely our own institutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sovereign AI project, meaning Catholics building our own AI, is absolutely essential, in large part because I know how important it is to train an AI with a clear objective in mind, and I don't think secular AI companies will ever do this. So they may eventually try to ensure that their models are able to succeed at saturating like a Catholic fidelity benchmark, but that's not the same thing as truly being aligned. So I think it's essential that we build our own. And I think that there's a role to play for the church. And actually, in fact, I would go so far as to say I think the Catholic Church is the only institution on earth that can effectively train a real aligned AI. And that's in large part because we have 2,000 years of fundamentally consistent doctrine and dogma. We can build really robust evals, and we can ship an AI model which is aligned that can be generally useful, meaning we can use it and trust it. And I think that's very unique, and we should take advantage of that. But that being said, as far as like evangelizing, the big tech founders and things like that, I don't think that's gonna. I don't think it really is gonna come down to just focusing on, what we've always tried to do, which is Catholics need to be very overt about their faith as much as they possibly can. Doesn't mean you have to be proclaiming it from the rooftops, but living well, living righteously, making sure that your moral views, your spiritual views are expressed within these companies and within society, that we're actively engaged in the civic process. The best way to influence these people is frankly to be good citizens, because a lot of these Mark Andreessens and others, they have people, they have kids, as far as I know, and therefore they care about the future and they want to make sure that the future turns out well. So, and they find that a lot of Catholics are just great allies in this because they want the best thing for their kids. They want the best thing for civilization. They're very active in ensuring that the technology is being applied in the right ways and safeguarded in the right ways. That's a great way to effectively to evangelize, as opposed to pointing fingers at them for missteps that they've made, things like this. I just don't think that gets us too far. I think the other thing is too, it's important with building Catholic AI and putting it out there, is you never know when one of them, they may go through a dark place and they may decide they want to look to the church for some answers, and they may end up turning to our AI just to try a few tough scenarios on it, and they may be impressed with the answers, and you don't know where that may lead.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea is that you have to engage, right? You cannot just build this. You go off and build a parallel economy, like some people like to talk about. Like, you have to be engaged in the marketplace of ideas. Otherwise, they're not going to take you seriously, right? If you're just out there saying like, "Oh, technology is bad, we're not going to try anything," then generally speaking, you're also not doing the right thing. But then people are they're not going to take anything you say seriously. But in this case, like, you guys are building serious products, and maybe I love to go through these hypotheticals. Like, maybe because of influence that you have, or other people in the space, if you can get those allies and you say, "Hey, we're actually going to engage them. We're going to invite them to our Builders AI forum, right? We're going to invite them to come to hear these ideas and just see what they think, right?" I've debated doing this with some of the dinners I'm hosting, is like inviting people who are, not really, like, they're definitely not living their faith, but they had some connection to the faith growing up, for example, and see if we can bring it back. Because we all know that when you understand about the transcendentals, about truth, like, it resonates with you when you see the truth. And a lot of these people, my theory is that they have deep down severe insecurities or desires to understand the truth, and they've become successful. So they have some sort of security in what they have now with a pile of money, or they've got good friends, but there's still something missing. And we all know that because they are deep down seeking the truth. I'd love to brainstorm with you on these ideas another time, but I want to get to a couple more pieces here. So we work with a lot of different small business owners and Catholic founders, and I'm curious, how do you see small Catholic business owners being able to utilize AI? Because a lot of people just, they look at this probably say, I can't build a large language model. Like, I can't do that. So I'm just like, I'm not going to think about it. How do we integrate it into small businesses?
Well, I mean, let me start with this. It's a bit provocative, but it's important to recognize what the impacts of AI and robotics, so physical AI, are going to have on the economy. It's going to be massive, like over the course of the next 10, 20 years, and we're going to start feeling those effects much sooner than that. You're going to see a lot of automation going on and a lot of jobs being replaced, a lot of businesses just shutting down. So, and I say this for those people who think they can just ignore it. It's not relevant to me. I have nothing to worry about. I mean, think again. I think a lot of time we think about AI, we think about these disembodied intelligences living in, large compute clusters and the things coming for white collar work, knowledge work. We forget about the robots. Now we're a few years away before, I think we're going to have AI, which has a strong enough world model that it can effectively navigate and be generalized enough that it can work in the world in a way that makes sense. But we'll overcome those obstacles soon. And then it's just a question of manufacturing at scale. And places like China, they're very good at this. Elon with Tesla and Optimus, they're going to effectively do this just like they did Tesla cars. And pretty soon these robots will be everywhere. And so in those situations, really the big question we have to ask ourselves is, if I have a robot with 10 fingers, right, and with a brain that basically has mastered most of at least STEM, and what couldn't it do? That poses a really important question, I think, to us, is that we ultimately have to look at ourselves and ask ourselves. I mean, when that moment comes, and it may not be a job there for me, am I going to be okay? And I say this because I don't think work is going to disappear. I think humans will always effectively have work to do. It just may transform, right? So, I may have spent my time training to be a certain thing because frankly, it earns me a good paycheck, which allows me to pay my mortgage and put my kids through college, which is great. It makes sense. A lot of people just never actually stop to ask themselves, what do I feel like though I was made to do? Like, do I feel like my gifts are being used? Like, do I feel like when I work, I feel more alive, right? Like I'm doing what I was meant to do. And I think for a lot of people, that's not what work is for them. It's just a way to make money to survive. I think survival is not going to be a big thing in the future. I think, well, everyone will have, I agree with Elon, we're probably heading towards an era of superabundance, right? High, universal high income. So then it really comes down to, do I know who I am? Do I know what I'm made for? Do I know what my gifts are? What I'm meant to give to the world? And I think having time to figure that out, and then I think in the end, it doesn't matter if you're getting paid for doing the work you're doing or not. You're doing it because you just feel like you're meant to do it. And I think that, like I said, there'll always be work to do. We do feel that there'll be like an Etsy economy that will emerge, which we think will be strong. So this is like juxtaposition with like the GDP economy, which will be turbocharged by AI and robots, where people will pay more for goods and services because they're made by humans. People will contribute to the Etsy economy, their goods and services, again, not for money, just because they just want to see the things that they're being made are going to be used by others. If we move into smaller communities, which I think inevitably will happen with AI and in the robotics age, we'll move out of cities, which are kind of unhealthy to begin with, and we'll be able to organize communities, hopefully like the medievals did, with a church at the center, small communities where we know each other effectively better and we can all contribute and work together. I think all of us will be able to find a place to add value in that kind of community. So I think first off, to acknowledge what's actually going to happen. And then two, I become a super user of the technology. The more likely you are to use the technology and are finding ways to leverage it to effectively and improve your business, become more efficient. I think you'll have a longer shelf life, so to speak. But ultimately, I would just say, start thinking now. Start asking yourself the bigger questions. That if it didn't have your work, what would you do? Would you continue to do the same thing? If so, I don't think you have a whole lot to worry about. If not, then I would start thinking about, what else you might think about doing in the future.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if we, what stood out to me most when you just said all this is that if we go down this route where people do have let's say, more time in their hands to think. Because I mean, nowadays, even if you're not working some big corporate job, most people just seem to be busy. Like everybody you ask says, "Oh, I'm just busy." I wonder if having more time will lead to people asking those questions more about what their objectives are, what fulfills them. And if they have the abilities to do so, we could see a world where people are having more connection to their product. I was using Magisterium the other day to write this blog post about trying to connect what St. Thomas Aquinas says about being connected to your work. I do, honestly, I can't thank you enough for Magisterium. It helps me so much with my research, with building these things. And it's also very easy for me to understand once I read it. But I do wonder if people will see that. And then it gives us, you could say it's kind of it should be a very motivating thing as a Catholic, because we know with certainty that we understand the true objective of life, right? We understand what the goal is, to get to heaven. And because of that, we'll basically end up probably being looked up to by those who do not have this understanding. If they go out of work, they'll say, well, why is my friend over here so fulfilled, so happy? Why does he have this nice, happy family? And that will then lead to the conversations that lead to conversion, would be my hope, based on that thing you just outlined. So
Yeah. Yeah,
I like
totally.
that. Do you have any particular, so I guess this may be the same question, but I want to ask it really pointedly, like, how can small businesses promote the proper use of AI? And I usually think about this in the context of, if I'm a small business owner and I could improve my margins by firing 5 of my staff and then replacing with AI, I shouldn't, right? That my perspective would be, I should not do that. I should find a way to make those 5 people more productive so that we can all have income for our families. But how do we promote the proper use of AI within small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, this is really tough, right? I mean, one is, yeah, certainly letting people go and replace them with AI and robots is brutal. In a world in which when those people left would then be free, could they be taken care of? They wouldn't have to worry about money because we have a solid safety net, and so that would give them the time they need to explore what they're now meant to be doing. Because obviously, it's not meant to be with me anymore. This wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. In a world in which they lose their job and they may not be able to, pay their rent and feed their kids, it's awful. So I do think that's something that we do have to take into account, like as Catholic business owners, is we have to, if we can't keep someone, then I think we have to help them through that transition period as much as we can. And that can be in large part just connecting into your local Catholic community to see if you can help them find another job and stuff. But I recognize these are tough, but I also want to recognize that in a world in which we're increasingly heading towards automation, the competitive landscape is going to be brutal, right? And you're going to face enormous pressure to fully automate. I mean, effectively, if I can have an AI to do the work for $20 a month instead of paying a human being several thousand, that's enormous pressure on the small business, right? If I buy an Optimus robot for $25,000 and effectively I bring one of those in, and it can work 18 hours a day, stops for charging or swaps batteries, it's on the floor for 24. That's enormous pressure, right, on the business. And how am I supposed to compete if my competitor goes and hires the robots and I'm stuck paying these humans? So I think there's certain realities there that we have to come to grips with. I think the economic drivers here are huge, and I just don't think any one business alone is going to be able to weather this. And this is why I think it's so important that we as citizens become very active in this process. I mean, in some ways we have to actively engage our public officials, our elected leaders, so they can appropriately look at this issue and pass regulation so that they kind of have our backs in these situations. So if I do have to let someone go, I don't have to worry about them being on the poverty line. That being said, I think I'll ultimately just recognize that all the AIs that are out there are not made the same. So it's important to look at the companies behind them, to look at their track records, to look at their CEOs and their founders. Some companies take AI safety very seriously, right, and work very hard to build safety rails into their AIs. Other companies care less about this. Some companies are fine to have erotica, content, basically generated through their AIs. Other companies are not okay with that. I would say, ChatGPT is kind of the go-to, but there are others, and I would take the time to study those companies to try their models out and effectively to determine for yourself if this is an AI that you feel effectively you would like to rely on to give you advice. And if you're not happy with AI, then I would say keep trying one until you find one that, at least of all the ones you evaluate, is at least more aligned than the others.
Hey there, quick interruption. If your business is growing and you're looking for support, reach out to us today. My executive assistant, Karen, and I are helping virtual assistants in the Philippines get jobs with Catholic businesses, and we're calling it Paraclete VA. This is an opportunity for you to get strong support without breaking the bank financially. Doing this also helps Catholic VAs in the Philippines and other places get better jobs with employers that won't ask them to compromise their morals, something that, frequently happens more often than you'd like to know. Reach out with what you're looking for at dearcfpod@gmail.com, and we will find some top folks with the skills that you need. We'll present them to you, and if you hire somebody, you pay us a fee of $500, then $500 if you're still happy with them after 30 days in. Please note, we are not an employer of record, so we are not the ones paying them. You will be paying them as a contractor. We can help you facilitate best practices there, but we are not the employer. You will still be paying them directly. If this is something of interest to you, reach out today. Again, dearcfpod@gmail.com with a little bit about what you're looking for and change the life of a family today. All right, back to the show. What you're doing is obviously a very ambitious project. And I came from part of the country where I didn't necessarily feel like the Catholics around me were particularly ambitious. And I think that's wrong, because if you look at St. Paul, you can say St. Paul is relatively ambitious, right? So are all the apostles. Can you just talk about this idea of pursuing great things, big things, as a Catholic, and how to reconcile that? Because a lot of people look at you and say, "Oh, that's just ego. That's just you trying to build something. You're just looking for clout or for financial success." Can you talk about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Catholics, we're called to strive for greatness, and that greatness ultimately is embodied in our Lord, right? So we try to embody the greatness that He showed and revealed to us. But that being said, I mean, if you take like the spirituality of Jose Maria Escriva, I mean, He encouraged us, so we should consider our work as an opportunity to grow in greatness, to grow in holiness. And so I think we have to take that very seriously. So that's one thing. So no matter where you work, it's important that you do the best you possibly can, and that you're always trying to be better. And that means for yourself, but also trying to do better for your company and for your fellow employees. AI, learning how to master that technology is a way of being able to effectively add greater value to your company. If you can leverage that technology to be more productive and to be more useful, that can be a way of doing it. But I think like the thing I would say more than anything, it's important for us to recognize the stakes here. So yeah, Silas, you mentioned St. Paul. I'm a big fan of St. Paul. This is a guy who understood that souls were at stake here. Being a Catholic and not thinking a lot about the importance of evangelization, of being a witness, isn't good. I mean, this is something that should be a major preoccupation of every Catholic. And this is not about necessarily like, saving someone's soul from damnation, right? I think ultimately we know we have a loving God, and He'll effectively sort people out. But this is about people experiencing hell on earth. And so this, if we have something that's orienting our lives, that's guiding us, giving us a sense of purpose, that makes us feel loved and gives us a sense of meaning and purpose, and we're not actively sharing that with everyone we possibly can, there's something not right there. Now, of course, we have to respect that there's a time and a place. But St. Paul used to go out into the markets and get in a bucket, and he proclaimed the gospel. That's how convicted he was. How critical it was for him to share that message, even when he knew he may be pulled down off that bucket and beaten. And I think that we all have to have that same kind of urgency. We have to recognize that these are people who desperately need to hear the gospel, and we should, in any way we can, be trying to preach the gospel. And that may mean at times following that kind of the old Franciscan, adage, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words, right? So our actions can be that. We don't always have to use our mouths. But I do think that we have to recognize that if we are passive and we're not focused on evangelization as a church, if we're not willing to take risks and proclaim the gospel, there are souls that are going to be lost on this earth because of that. And we have to take responsibility for that. That's on us. And I think we'll be held to account on that in a time we're saying before our Lord in judgment.
I think we will. And this is part of the reason I asked the question about small businesses, because my general belief is that most people do not get converted by arguments. I know I'm surrounded by a lot of people who are converted to the faith because they're extremely intellectual and they just read their way into the faith. I understand that. But a lot of people will never get to that point until they're emotionally drawn to something. When you run a small business, let's say you have like 12, 10, 15 employees, you spend a lot of time with those people every week. And if you are a truly Catholic and you're not like, you don't have to go be out there, like you said, just preaching on the sidewalks. But if you are living your faith truly, people will be attracted to that. And then you can have the discussion. So this is why I think the small business owner has such a unique ability to be an instrument of conversion in the world, because they're involved in their community in a way that when you go to these big mega corporations, there's just almost an inability to truly have humanity inserted throughout, because honestly, HR ruins everything. That's my opinion. But I think it's an interesting perspective, and I do. I mean, I've talked about this a few times on the pod. Like, if you think about the fact that once the apostles received the Holy Spirit and they just went out, we have all been. I mean, anybody who's been confirmed should be in the same mode of operations. Like, if I truly believe this, why am I not going out and converting people? So I appreciate you bringing that up. I really think St. Paul is the man for our time right now. Kind of the man for any time, but he's especially the man for our time right now. So, do you have any perspective on when ambition could be misplaced, just for that kind of other angle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important, and effectively a spiritual director would be able to help you with this. But effectively, is to look at, and I think ambition may be the wrong word. I think is hunger for excellence. The question is, why are you hungry to be excellent, right? For what? If you're hungry to be excellent because you want a promotion, because you want more money, so you can have more things, which make you feel more important and make other people's regard you as important. Well, that's obviously disordered, right? That's not good. But if you're hungry to be excellent because that you feel that your work is an opportunity to evangelize, and then one of the ways you want to evangelize is just being excellent at your job, treating others with kindness and respect, and just being a light in your office. Well, then that's good. That's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of Jose Maria. Right? Is I think he acknowledges how our workplace, doing our daily tasks, and all these, they're all opportunities for evangelization. And we may not always be able to understand how acting in a kind of a holy saintly way in our day to day lives or at our work is affecting others, but it does. And I think this is why the call to just do it, right? Do it because it's the right thing to do and it's what God wants you to do, and trust that God will work through you, even though you may not be deliberately, right, trying to evangelize.
Yeah, that's a huge one because it's like people, you don't have to be, you don't have to be some theologian to evangelize. If you just truly love God, like he will shine through you, right? And I think that's such a cool part. Is like evangelization isn't reserved for Thomas Aquinas of the world, right? It's for everybody. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And one thing I want to say on this, like I think it's going to be absolutely critical to say civilization. I think it's really important right now, and people they perceive of the way that they think of Catholicism or the church or the Pope, what they think of is kind of a highly prescriptive way to live your life, which means like saying no to a lot of things, which instinctually, or I've been told, are things that I should desire. No, you shouldn't. You should do this, right? And so I think a lot of people just feel like it's hard. Like being a Catholic is hard, and is it worth it? I mean, what's the big deal? What do I really get out of putting in all that hard work? And I think sometimes it can be it can be understandable why they're like, I don't think it's worth it, right? Or I don't think I can. I don't think I'm equipped like to grind like that, to put in that hard work. And I think in large part, one of the reasons why we have a hard time convincing people to become Catholic is because there's very few times in their life where they probably have met someone who's a joy to be around, who's at peace, right? Who's just a loving and a light wherever they go, right? If they saw those exemplars on a regular basis and saw that they were happy, they would naturally be attracted to those things, and they'd want to know, how are you doing it? Right? I mean, how are you being such a good husband? How are you being such a good father and being good at your work? I don't understand it. I think because people see so few of those exemplars, they effectively don't believe in the promises, right? Or the prescriptions that they get from the church. They don't see those as recipes to being better, being more happy, being more content. So we have to make sure that we're being that light. Otherwise, people won't believe us, to be perfectly frank. And I agree with you. I think that some people do, like myself, come to the faith through some kind of intellectual processes, right? And then we learn, effectively how to be Catholic. But a lot of people, especially in the workforce, I mean, you can't go there and get on your soapbox and start preaching in the office, right?
Yeah.
The only way that they're going to see Christ is through your actions, and so that's why we have to take on our cross, and we have to live that in our offices.
hmm Yeah, that's why we have to. I forget who wrote this, but you have to, like, the greatest thing that you can do for those around you is to basically pursue true transformation of your own heart. Like, ask God to transform your heart, because if you do that, or if you allow Him to do that, it will spill over to others. So I like that a lot. I love this idea. This will be the last major idea. Then we'll go to rapid fire. This idea that we are co-creators with God, right? We are created in His image and likeness, and obviously there's co-creators. It's very obvious co-creators as married people, right? Having children, but also as entrepreneurs. And I'm just curious if you have any particular experiences or perspectives on how we come closer to God by leaning into that entrepreneurial kind of if you will, that seed that God has put in us as co-creators. Have you particularly seen anything for you or others around you where when you lean into that aspect of your identity or of your being, that it brings you closer to God?
Yeah, I certainly would ascribe to that. I think in large part it comes down to just recognizing that we all have been given gifts by God, and one of the things we're called to do is to hone and develop those gifts and then put them at the service of others. I think I said this earlier. And once having known those gifts, then the question is how do I use these gifts to help people, right? To lift up others, to improve things in my community. That means finding problems that I can effectively address with my skills. So I think understanding who you are, and understanding what God expects of you, and what a good community is meant to look like, to understand what a good civilization is supposed to look like, is important, because then we can look at ourselves, our communities, our civilization, and say, where do things seem to be wrong? Like, where's something missing, or where could something be done better? And then how could am I the person who could step in there and provide a better service, right? Or build a better good, or just deliver those services and goods in ways that are just better than everyone else. And so I think again, I see these as opportunities to just quietly evangelize, and that's one reason I think it's important to have really solid Catholic, human intellectual spiritual formation, because it just helps to bring into clarity basically our callings and problems that God wants us to be solving with our gifts.
Prescribed. How would you describe the amazing positive future? Because if we don't have that goal to work towards, we will just kind of like basically slowly go backwards. So if there are people who are listening who want to build this, what do you think that would look like?
Well, I mean, I think for most Catholics who are born and raised Catholic, I mean, they've been listening to the gospel for a long time, so I think they can probably intuit a lot of very common sense things that should be part of the, a civilization we're trying to build, right? And one in which everybody has the opportunity to realize their full potential, right? That's a big one. So that means I have to have a quality education. And I think education, maybe not in a conventional sense, but an education which gives me broad spectrum exposure to a bunch of different ways, right? That I can add value, that I can serve, and then once finding an area that I feel really connected to, I have an environment in which I can then nurture those gifts, right? And then I have mentorship, so I can further develop those and kind of apply those. I think education is absolutely key for that, and I think we do have to take kind of a real hard look at how education is currently delivered, because I think in some ways it's too focused on trying to equip people to succeed in the GDP economy and not about how to succeed in life. And I think that's something that,
Mhm.
as for Catholics, especially those who are involved in Catholic education, that has to change, because I assure you, being a good person is going to be more important in the future than being technically proficient in a very specific field. I think that education should be reordered to that purpose. So that's one area, and then the other is thinking about how our government should effectively work, like how our communities effectively should work, and in large part that just means we have to be engaged so that we can all benefit from each other's kind of collective wisdom. So we're all kind of aware of the problems, and that we're effectively are committed to ensuring that those are effectively solved, right? So a better world, let's say the city of God, would be one in which problems emerge and the community comes together to solve them, right? That's obvious. But how do we do that more efficiently? How do we root out, corruption, ensure that those people that are in leadership positions are there for the right reasons? Do we have effective transparency? Do we have accountability? Do we have subsidiarity? I think these are all the critical facets. And then just going one more step up, I mean, ultimately, this all has to be rooted in the community having a collective sense of a collective kind of telos, a collective and we would say a religious tradition, right? That kind of binds us all together. We think about the medieval villages, the way they were built, with the church set solely in the town square, and everything was kind of built around that. I think that we've lost something in modern day cities. They're confusing and bewildering places, and I think we have to recapture that. I think we have to recognize ultimately the thing that's going to orient us and keep us united is the church, and so we have to make sure that our lives are oriented around that principle. And frankly, just this is to opine on something that's kind of particularly important to me, is these churches shouldn't be places that are just built with some sense of utility in it. The things I just check into it every Sunday and throw something in the collection plate. These should be active, vibrant centers which reflect the very best that human hands and gifts are capable of producing. And I think this means, and I think in a lot of ways, if you look at the churches of the medieval age and look at the churches of today, those are a pretty big sign of what we value, aren't they? Our houses have got bigger. The cars we drive are more fancy, right? And our churches have got uglier, and they're built with much greater utility, a lot less time and energy. Once upon a time, churches were built by generations of families because they wanted to build it with the very best that they had, and sometimes they were limited in what they had, so they had to pass on that response to the next generation. For us, now it's about getting the church up as fast as we possibly can. And so I think there's
Mhm.
something wrong with that. So I think in the future that this civilization we should be trying to build needs to be kind of focused on the things which matter the most, and the way we go about building our towns, our communities, I think are a sign of that. So we should be very intentional.
I like that a lot. There was this thing I just saw recently. I'll just comment on them. Is the Minimalist podcast shared a clip of this guy talking about the idea of convenience being a lie, right? It's like, I could easily have my newspaper delivered to my house, but I choose to go out to the newspaper stand to buy it because I bump into the police officer. I get to talk to them. Like you intentionally have this sort of inconvenience because we're not just here as humans to just do things and to achieve certain things. That's not what it means to be human, right? I think the way they put it is like we're meant to just putter around sometimes, right? Like we can just exist. We can just be. We can just we don't have to always be trying to build something. And I think this is challenging for entrepreneurs because we're usually pretty action oriented. But I do like that a lot. I think this idea of reorienting everything around the family will be correct. Like the community space is big. I talked with Sandra Rash about this a long time ago when we talked about the ideal society and getting rid of suburbia, et cetera. So um, I'm going to think about that more, but I really appreciate that. So let's wrap up here. We've had a really great discussion. I'm sure we could go on forever, but rapid fire. What is your favorite scripture?
Essentially, to quote it, he who has been given much, much will be demanded.
Okay. And who is your favorite entrepreneur?
Probably Elon Musk.
And can you say why? Because a lot of Catholics will be like, oh no, we don't like that. Can you explain why? I
Yeah,
like Elon
well,
Musk
I
a lot.
think Elon's a complicated person, and I think I pray that effectively he will eventually be evangelized, and you'll come to see why the faith is so important. But what I love about Elon Musk is I do truly believe his entire life he's tried to focus on solving real problems, and he's been willing to sacrifice and take big risks in order to effectively solve those. I mean, you think about the industries that he's spun up. I think he's like CEO of 7 companies right now. With let's just say like a PayPal. He wanted to empower people to be able to pass money around more effectively, right? Without having to go through banks, which, I won't opine on banks. He wanted to get electric cars. He wanted to find a way to produce, cars which were electric, which had less an environmental impact. He wanted to find ways to get to space, to explore the universe, to colonize Mars. These are all things I think which are very inspiring. And I don't think he did it for money. If you look at his story, he went all in multiple times. This wasn't about money for him. It was about doing epic things which are inspiring, things that effectively need to be done that require grinding like crazy, and willing to roll your sleeves up and do it. And so I think for someone who practices what he preaches, who's willing to roll up his sleeves and do what needs to be done, he's very inspiring. I'm not saying the way he always does it. I'm not saying that working for him is
Yeah.
is easy, but I do think he's someone who's spent his whole life trying to make an impact and make the world a better place, and I respect him for that.
Yeah. I think we should all take inspiration to basically play our lives to, turn it up to 10, right? Like do the maximum that we can. So I like that. Who's your favorite saint?
That's a real tough one. Probably the one I tend to identify the most would probably be, okay, I'm going to say two. So St. Paul, and I think St. Josemaria Scribe has been very helpful to me personally.
Yeah.
And I don't say this when my wife will be upset, St. Joseph.
Those three are definitely amazing. And what's your favorite devotion?
There's a St. Patrick's breastplate is something I pray every day.
Can you explain more about that?
Yeah, it's a prayer. I think most of us have probably I've heard it. One portion of it goes, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ above me, Christ below me, Christ in me, Christ to my right, Christ to my left. It's just it's a Trinitarian prayer, which just reminds us, it
God is
helps
everywhere.
fortify us against daily trials. And
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I love this a lot. This has been great, Matthew. I appreciate you coming on. Any final calls to the audience aside from like people should definitely go check out Magisterium AI, which I've already been promoting quite a lot.
No, just try as much as possible to follow AI as closely as you can. And like I said, just remember what life's all about, because ultimately, in the end of the day, that's ultimately what's going to matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. God bless you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. God bless.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode with Matthew Harvey Sanders. I really enjoyed this episode, and I hope you do as well. I would encourage each of you to consider for a moment your personal responsibility regarding the AI age. Think about what is your part in ensuring this technology is pointed at the right problems and serves human flourishing. Are you cultivating the moral, spiritual, and intellectual formation needed to be a leader in this new era? And in what area of your life can you demonstrate greater and bolder wild ambition for God? spend some time thinking about these things and praying over them in adoration in the coming weeks. I think there's a lot of things to chew on from this conversation with Matthew. He's just full of so many insights, and the work he is doing is an example to all of these things. So I'd encourage you to think about this and recognize what God might be calling you to, because we've talked about this before. We're not called to small things. God is calling us to greatness. It's just a matter of what scope exactly he's calling us to pursue. So greatness always, but depending on the objective will change. So thank you so much for tuning in to Catholic Founders. God bless and happy building. We'll see you next time.